The trapper's breath reeked of stale tobacco and corn liquor when he leaned across the wooden table toward Eliza Vance. His yellowed teeth bared in what he probably thought was a charming smile. She pressed herself against the back of her chair in the dimly lit trading post, her fingers gripping the rough edge of the table as he slid a bottle of whiskey toward her with grimy fingernails. "Come on now, pretty lady," the trapper said, his voice thick with drink and desire. "This here's the finest whiskey from Kentucky, worth more than gold in these parts. All I'm asking for is a little company tonight, just you and me under the stars." Eliza's stomach turned. She had come to Stockton, California in the spring of 1867 seeking refuge with her aunt after her parents died of fever back in Missouri. But when she arrived 3 weeks ago, she discovered her aunt had passed away the previous winter. With no money and nowhere to go, she had been sleeping in the back room of this trading post, doing odd jobs for the owner, Mr. Patterson, who let her stay in exchange for keeping the place clean and helping with inventory. "I am not interested," Eliza said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. She was 20 years old, exhausted and frightened, but she refused to let this man see her fear. "Please leave me alone." The trapper's face darkened. He was a wiry man with a patchy beard and cold eyes that held no kindness. "Now you listen here. I've been tracking beaver and elk in these mountains for 3 months. I got pelts worth a fortune, and I'm willing to share my wealth with you. Don't be foolish, girl. A woman alone out here needs protection." The lady said no. The voice came from the doorway, deep and steady as bedrock. Eliza's eyes darted toward the entrance where a man stood backlit by the afternoon sun. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that nearly filled the doorframe. As he stepped inside, she could see him more clearly. He had long, dark hair that fell past his shoulders, a thick beard, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His buckskin shirt stretched tight across a chest rippling with muscle, and his arms looked strong enough to wrestle a bear. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived countless dangers in the wilderness. The trapper stood up quickly, his hand moving toward the knife at his belt. "This ain't your concern, mountain man. The lady and I were just negotiating." The mountain man walked forward with measured steps, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "There is no negotiating happening here. Only a man bothering a woman who wants nothing to do with him. You think you can tell me what to do?" The trapper's voice rose with anger and alcohol-fueled bravado. "I got rights. I got money." The mountain man reached out with one large hand and picked up the bottle of whiskey from the table. For a moment, Eliza thought he might drink from it himself. Instead, he held it up to the light, examining the amber liquid inside, then walked to the door and hurled the bottle against the stone wall outside. The glass shattered with a sharp crack that echoed through the trading post, and whiskey splashed across the ground like wasted blood. "Your money's no good here," the mountain man said, turning back to face the trapper. "Leave now, or I will remove you myself." The trapper looked between the mountain man and Eliza, his face flushed red with rage and humiliation. He was clearly weighing his options, trying to decide if his pride was worth a fight with someone who outweighed him by at least 50 pounds of solid muscle. Common sense won out. He spat on the floor, grabbed his worn hat from the table, and stormed toward the door. "This ain't over," he muttered as he pushed past the mountain man. "Yes, it is," the mountain man replied, and something in his tone made it clear he meant every word. After the trapper disappeared down the muddy street, silence filled the trading post. Eliza released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together in her lap to hide her fear. The mountain man turned to face her properly for the first time. His eyes, which had been hard as flint when dealing with the trapper, softened when they met hers. "Are you all right, miss?" "Yes," Eliza said, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, thank you. I am grateful for your intervention." He nodded slowly, studying her face as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. "Has he bothered you before?" "He arrived in town yesterday," Eliza explained, finding her voice growing steadier. "He has been drinking at the saloon and making inappropriate suggestions to several women. I thought I would be safe here at the trading post during the day, but Mr. Patterson stepped out to make a delivery." The mountain man frowned, deep lines forming between his brows. "A woman should not have to hide to feel safe." "No, she should not," Eliza agreed, "but the world is not always as it should be." He could not argue with that. He had seen enough of the world's ugliness during his years in the mountains to know she spoke the truth. He walked to one of the chairs and sat down carefully, as if worried his weight might break the furniture. Up close, Eliza could see scars on his hands and forearms, evidence of a life lived rough and dangerous. "My name is Harrison Sawyer," he said. "Most folks just call me Sawyer. I trap and hunt in the Sierra Nevada, been doing it for about 8 years now." "Eliza Vance," she replied, feeling it only proper to introduce herself since he had saved her from an uncomfortable and potentially dangerous situation. "I am new to Stockton. I came from Missouri to live with my aunt, but she passed away before I arrived." Something flickered in Sawyer's eyes, an understanding of loss that needed no further explanation. "I am sorry for your troubles. Do you have other family here?" "No," Eliza admitted. "I have no one. I have been trying to earn enough money to perhaps travel to San Francisco, where there might be more opportunities for work." Sawyer was quiet for a moment, turning this information over in his mind. He had come to Stockton to sell his winter's take of furs and stock up on supplies before heading back into the mountains. He had planned to leave tomorrow morning, but something about this woman with her careful posture and frightened eyes made him hesitate. She reminded him of a deer he had once found caught in a snare, all tense muscles and barely controlled panic, waiting to see if he meant to harm or help. "The trading post is no place for you to stay," he said finally. "Not if men like that trapper think they can bother you here." "I have nowhere else to go," Eliza said quietly. "Mr. Patterson has been kind enough to let me stay in exchange for work, and I am grateful for it. I will manage." "Managing and living are two different things," Sawyer observed. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "I have a cabin about 2 days' ride from here, up in the foothills. It is not fancy, but it is solid and safe. I am heading back tomorrow. You could come with me if you wanted." Eliza stared at him in shock. "Sir, I appreciate your help today, but I cannot simply go off into the mountains with a stranger." "I understand your caution," Sawyer said. "But think about your situation. You have no money, no family, and no real prospects here. That trapper might come back, or there might be others like him. Winter is still a few months away. You could stay at the cabin, help me prepare for the cold season. I will pay you fair wages, and when spring comes, you will have enough money to make a real start somewhere." It was a practical offer, delivered without any of the leering or innuendo the trapper had employed. Sawyer's expression was earnest, and his eyes held no hidden intentions. Still, Eliza hesitated. She knew nothing about this man except that he had intervened when she needed help. Going into the wilderness with him would be a tremendous risk. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "That is reasonable," Sawyer agreed. He stood up, and Eliza was struck again by his sheer size. He was not just tall but powerfully built, with the kind of strength that came from years of hard physical labor. "I will be at the general store most of today, getting supplies. I am staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. If you decide you want to come with me, meet me at the livery stable at dawn tomorrow. If you do not come, I will understand and I will leave you be." "Thank you," Eliza said, not sure what else to say. Sawyer nodded and walked to the door. He paused there and looked back at her. "For what it is worth, Miss Vance, I give you my word that you would be safe with me. I have lived alone in those mountains for a long time, and I know what it means to be lonely. But I also know what it means to be decent. I would never ask anything of you that you were not willing to give." Then he was gone, his heavy footsteps fading as he walked away down the street. Eliza sat alone in the trading post, her mind churning with confusion and fear and something else she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just desperation. She had been in Stockton for 3 weeks, and in that time, she had learned that opportunities for a single woman with no family were scarce. She could perhaps find work as a laundress or a cook, but the wages would be meager, and she would still face the constant threat of men who saw a woman alone as an invitation. Mr. Patterson returned an hour later, carrying a crate of goods he had delivered to a family on the edge of town. He was a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and a balding head. "Everything all right here, Miss Eliza?" he asked, setting the crate down with a grunt. Eliza told him about the trapper and Sawyer's intervention. Mr. Patterson's face darkened with anger at the trapper's behavior and then softened with relief at Sawyer's help. "I know Harrison Sawyer," Mr. Patterson said, nodding thoughtfully. "He has been coming through Stockton for years, always pays his debts, never causes trouble. He is a good man as far as mountain men go, keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and fair. He offered me work," Eliza said carefully, "at his cabin in the mountains." Mr. Patterson raised his eyebrows. "Did he now? That is unusual. Sawyer has always been a solitary sort. But I suppose if he needs help preparing for winter, it makes sense." He looked at Eliza with paternal concern. "Are you thinking of going?" "I do not know," Eliza admitted. "It seems foolish to go off with a man I just met, but staying here seems foolish too." "You are in a difficult position," Mr. Patterson acknowledged. "I wish I could offer you better accommodations here, but my wife and I barely make ends meet with the trading post. We do not have room for a permanent lodger. And truth be told, I worry about you here. That trapper is not the first man to take an interest in you, and he probably will not be the last." Eliza knew he was right. Even in the short time she had been in Stockton, she had faced more unwanted attention than she cared to remember. The town was rough, populated mostly by miners, trappers, and settlers trying to carve out a living from the unforgiving land. Respectable women were rare, and unprotected women even more so. "If you do decide to go with Sawyer," Mr. Patterson continued, "I think you would be safe with him. But that has to be your decision. Do not let anyone pressure you into something you are not comfortable with." That night, Eliza lay awake on her thin bedroll in the back room of the trading post, listening to the sounds of Stockton after dark. Drunken laughter from the saloon, the occasional gunshot, the creak of wagon wheels on the rutted street. She thought about her life before her parents died, when she had been safe and cared for in a small farmhouse outside Kansas City. She thought about the long journey west, traveling with a wagon train full of strangers, hoping for a new beginning with her aunt. She thought about arriving in Stockton to find that hope extinguished, replaced by the stark reality that she was completely alone. And she thought about Harrison Sawyer, the way he had stood between her and danger without hesitation, the quiet strength in his voice when he told the trapper to leave, the genuine concern in his storm-gray eyes when he asked if she was all right. And his offer, made without expecting anything in return except honest work. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the small window, Eliza had made her decision. She gathered her few belongings: 2 dresses, a warm shawl, a hairbrush, and a small locket that had belonged to her mother. Everything fit into a single canvas bag. She left a note for Mr. Patterson, thanking him for his kindness and telling him she had decided to take Sawyer's offer. Then she walked through the quiet streets toward the livery stable. Sawyer was already there, checking the saddle on a massive black horse that looked as strong as its owner. A pack mule stood nearby, loaded with supplies. When Sawyer saw Eliza approaching, something in his stern expression eased, though he did not quite smile. "You came," he said simply. "I did," Eliza replied, gripping her bag tightly. "I hope I am making the right decision." "Time will tell," Sawyer said. He gestured to a smaller brown mare tied next to his horse. "This is Maple. She is gentle and sure-footed. Do you know how to ride?" "I can manage," Eliza said, though she had not been on a horse in several months. Sawyer helped her secure her bag to the saddle, then offered his hand to help her mount. His palm was rough with calluses, but his grip was careful, as if he was aware of his own strength and made sure not to hold her too tightly. Once she was settled on the horse, he mounted his own with practiced ease. "It is a 2-day journey," Sawyer explained. "We will ride until mid-afternoon, make camp, then finish the trip tomorrow. The trail gets steep in places, so stay close behind me and let Maple set the pace. She knows the way." They rode out of Stockton as the town began to wake up. The streets were still mostly empty, though a few early risers watched them pass with curious eyes. Eliza felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She was leaving behind the only civilization for miles, riding into the wilderness with a man she barely knew. But she also felt a strange sense of relief, as if she were escaping a trap before it could close completely. The landscape around Stockton was harsh but beautiful. Rolling hills covered in dry grass gave way to oak trees and then pine forests as they climbed higher into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The air grew cooler and cleaner, free from the dust and smell of the town. Sawyer rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure Eliza was keeping up. He did not speak much, seemingly content with the silence, and Eliza found she did not mind. After weeks of feeling constantly on edge, there was something peaceful about the quiet rhythm of the horse's hooves and the whisper of wind through the trees. Around midday, they stopped beside a creek to water the horses and rest. Sawyer pulled out strips of dried venison and hardtack from his saddlebag and offered them to Eliza. She ate gratefully, realizing she had been too nervous to eat breakfast. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" Eliza asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 8 years, Sawyer replied, sitting on a fallen log and taking a long drink from his canteen. "I came west from Ohio after the war. Too many bad memories back there. I wanted someplace quiet where I could just exist without anyone asking questions or expecting anything." "You fought in the war?" Eliza asked carefully. "I did," Sawyer said, his jaw tightening slightly. 4 years of it. When it ended, I could not go back to the farm where I grew up. Everything felt different, or maybe I was different, so I kept moving west until I found these mountains." Eliza understood. The war had touched everyone, leaving scars both visible and hidden. Her own father had served briefly before illness sent him home, and he had never been quite the same afterward. "You ever get lonely?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I apologize, that was too forward." "It is all right," Sawyer said. He looked out at the trees, his expression distant. "Yes, I get lonely sometimes, but loneliness is easier to deal with than the noise and chaos of civilization. Out here, things are simple. I know what to expect from the animals and the weather. People are more complicated." "They can be," Eliza agreed. They continued riding after their brief rest. The trail grew steeper and narrower as they climbed higher into the mountains. Sawyer had been right about Maple. The mare was sure-footed and calm, even when the path skirted the edge of steep drops. Eliza tried not to look down, focusing instead on the horse's mane and the broad shape of Sawyer's shoulders ahead of her. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing beside a stream. Sawyer declared it a good place to camp for the night. He helped Eliza dismount, then began the efficient work of unsaddling the horses and setting up camp. Eliza watched, feeling somewhat useless, until Sawyer noticed her standing idle. "Can you gather kindling for a fire?" he asked. "Just small dry sticks and branches. Stay within sight of camp." Grateful for something to do, Eliza set about collecting firewood. The forest floor was covered in pine needles and fallen branches, making her task easy. By the time she returned with her arms full, Sawyer had arranged rocks in a circle and was striking flint to create sparks. Soon a small fire crackled to life, pushing back the growing chill of evening. Sawyer set a small pot of water to boil and added coffee grounds, then began preparing more substantial food than their midday fare. He had fresh bread from Stockton, along with beans and more dried meat. As they ate, the sky above the clearing turned from blue to purple to black, and stars emerged like scattered diamonds. "Tell me about your family," Sawyer said suddenly, surprising Eliza with the personal question. "What were they like?" Eliza set down her tin cup and gazed into the fire. "My father was a farmer. My mother kept the house and tended a garden. We were not wealthy, but we were happy. They both contracted fever during a bad outbreak last winter. My father died first, and my mother followed 3 days later. It happened so fast I barely had time to understand what was happening." "That is hard," Sawyer said quietly. "Losing people you love is always hard, but losing them both at once." "It felt like the world ended," Eliza admitted. "I had an older brother, but he died at Shiloh. After my parents passed, I had no one left in Missouri. My aunt in California was my only living relative, or so I thought. Coming west seemed like the only option. And now you are here with a stranger heading even deeper into the unknown," Sawyer observed. "Yes," Eliza said. She looked up from the fire to meet his eyes. In the flickering light, his face looked both harsh and kind at the same time. "But I think sometimes the unknown is less frightening than a known bad situation. Does that make sense?" "It does," Sawyer said. "It makes perfect sense." They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the fire burn down to glowing embers. Eventually, Sawyer stood and pulled a thick bedroll from his pack. "You take this," he said, handing it to Eliza. "It will keep you warm. I have blankets for myself." "I cannot take your bedroll," Eliza protested. "You can and you will," Sawyer said firmly but not unkindly. "The nights are cold this high up and you are not used to sleeping outdoors. I have done it 1,000 times. I will be fine." Eliza accepted the bedroll, touched by his consideration. She arranged it near the fire and lay down, pulling the heavy canvas and wool close around her. Across the fire, Sawyer wrapped himself in blankets and settled against a tree trunk, his rifle within easy reach. "Thank you," Eliza said softly, "for everything. For helping me today, for this opportunity, for your kindness." "Sleep well, Miss Vance," Sawyer replied. Eliza closed her eyes, expecting to lie awake worrying about her situation. Instead, she felt surprisingly safe. Maybe it was exhaustion from the long day of riding. Or maybe it was the presence of the strong, quiet man keeping watch nearby. Whatever the reason, she fell asleep quickly, lulled by the crackling fire and the night sounds of the forest. She woke once in the deep hours of night to find Sawyer still awake, staring into the darkness beyond their camp. protecting her, she realized, keeping her safe from whatever dangers lurked in the wilderness. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it brought a strange comfort. She closed her eyes and drifted back to sleep. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Sawyer had already rekindled the fire and was preparing a simple breakfast. They ate quickly, then packed up camp with the same efficiency they had set it up. Within an hour, they were back on the trail, climbing ever higher into the mountains. The second day of riding was more challenging than the first. The trail grew rougher, winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes, but the scenery was breathtaking. Eliza had never seen anything like the towering pines and granite cliffs that surrounded them. Clear streams tumbled over rocks, and in the distance, she could see snow-capped peaks piercing the sky. "This is beautiful," she breathed during one of their rest stops. "It is," Sawyer agreed, a hint of pride in his voice. "This is why I stay. The mountains are harsh, but they are honest. There is a purity here that you cannot find in towns and cities." They reached Sawyer's cabin in the late afternoon. It sat in a small meadow surrounded by pine trees, with a clear stream running along one edge. The cabin itself was sturdily built from logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It was not large, maybe 20 feet on each side, but it looked solid and well-maintained. "Welcome to your new home, at least for now," Sawyer said, dismounting. Eliza slid off Maple and looked around. The meadow was peaceful, filled with wildflowers and tall grass. The only sounds were the stream and the wind in the trees. It was so different from Stockton, from Missouri, from anywhere she had ever been. Sawyer led her inside the cabin. The interior was simple but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. There was a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a counter for preparing food, shelves holding supplies and tools, and a single bed in the far corner covered with furs and blankets. Everything was orderly and practical, exactly what she would have expected from a man like Sawyer. "I know it is not much," Sawyer said, suddenly seeming almost embarrassed by his humble dwelling, "but it keeps out the rain and snow." "It is wonderful," Eliza said honestly. Compared to sleeping on a bedroll in a trading post, this felt like luxury. "You will take the bed," Sawyer said, anticipating her protest. "I will build another sleeping area for myself. There is a small loft space above that I have been meaning to improve anyway. It will do me fine." Over the next few days, Eliza began to settle into her new life. Sawyer was true to his word about building a sleeping area for himself in the loft, hammering together a sturdy platform and adding a ladder for access. He gave Eliza space and privacy, never making her feel uncomfortable or threatened. Her days took on a rhythm. She woke with the sun and helped prepare breakfast. Then, while Sawyer went out to check his trap lines or hunt, she worked on tasks around the cabin. There was plenty to do. She washed and mended his clothes, which had been neglected for too long. She cleaned and organized the cabin, swept the floors, and even started a small garden near the stream. Sawyer had seeds he had been meaning to plant, and Eliza found satisfaction in working the earth and watching green shoots emerge in the evenings. They ate dinner together and talked. Slowly, carefully, they learned about each other. Sawyer told her about his childhood in Ohio, about growing up on a farm with 3 brothers. He spoke little about the war, and Eliza did not press him. Some wounds were too deep for casual conversation. She told him about her life in Missouri, about long summer days helping her mother in the garden and cool evenings listening to her father read from the Bible. She spoke about her brother, about how proud they had all been when he enlisted, and how devastating it was when the letter came informing them of his death. As the weeks passed, Eliza found herself growing comfortable in Sawyer's presence. He was unlike any man she had ever known. He did not talk unnecessarily or make false promises. His word was solid as stone, and his actions matched his words. When he said he would do something, he did it. When he gave his word that she was safe, she believed him completely. She also could not help but notice other things about him. The way his muscles moved under his shirt when he chopped firewood, the surprising gentleness of his large hands when he showed her how to gut a fish, the rare smile that softened his harsh features and made him look years younger, the intelligence in his eyes when they discussed books, for he had a surprising collection that he had accumulated over the years, carried up the mountain one or two at a time. For his part, Sawyer found himself increasingly drawn to Eliza. Her presence had transformed his cabin from a mere shelter into something that felt like a home. She brought light and warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. She was smart and capable, learning quickly how to survive in the wilderness. And she was beautiful in a natural, unadorned way that took his breath sometimes when he caught her profile backlit by the setting sun. But he kept his distance, honoring his promise that he would never ask anything of her she was not willing to give. She had come to him seeking safety and work, not romance. The last thing he wanted was to make her feel trapped or uncomfortable, so he buried his growing feelings deep and tried to maintain a respectful distance. One morning in early August, Eliza woke to find the cabin empty. This was not unusual. Sawyer often left early to check his traps or scout for game. But something felt different today. She could not explain it, just a subtle unease that prickled at the back of her neck. She went about her morning routine, making coffee and preparing biscuits for breakfast. But as the sun climbed higher and Sawyer still had not returned, her unease grew into worry. He always returned by midday at the latest, often much earlier. By afternoon, Eliza was genuinely frightened. What if something had happened? What if he had been injured and could not make it back? She knew almost nothing about tracking or navigating the wilderness. If she went looking for him, she would likely get lost herself. But the thought of sitting idle while he might be in danger was unbearable. She was standing on the porch, trying to decide what to do, when she heard it. A low, rumbling sound that raised the hair on her arms. She turned slowly and froze. At the edge of the clearing, just where the forest met the meadow, stood a massive brown bear. It must have weighed 500 pounds, with a head the size of a barrel and claws that gleamed in the sunlight. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She had seen bears from a distance during her time at the cabin, but never this close. The animal was staring directly at her, its small eyes assessing her. She knew she should back slowly toward the cabin door, but her legs would not obey. She was frozen with primal fear. The bear took a step forward, then another. Eliza forced herself to move backward, reaching behind her for the door handle. Her hand found wood instead. She had stepped the wrong direction in her panic. The bear, sensing her fear, rose up on its hind legs, towering even taller, and roared. The sound that came next was not the bear. It was Sawyer's voice shouting from somewhere to her left. "Eliza, get inside now." The shock of hearing her name broke her paralysis. She turned and ran for the cabin door, yanking it open and stumbling inside. Through the window, she saw Sawyer emerge from the forest trail at a run. He was carrying his rifle, but he did not raise it to shoot. Instead, he positioned himself between the cabin and the bear, spreading his arms wide and shouting at the top of his lungs. The bear dropped to all fours and swung its massive head toward this new threat. For a terrifying moment, Eliza thought it would charge Sawyer. But he held his ground, continuing to shout and make himself as large and threatening as possible. The bear hesitated, clearly torn between fight and flight. Then, with a final huff and snort, it turned and lumbered back into the forest. Sawyer stood there for a long moment, rifle ready, making sure the bear was truly gone. Then he turned and strode quickly to the cabin. He yanked the door open and stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Eliza. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough with adrenaline and fear. "No," Eliza managed, though she was shaking all over. "I am fine. It just frightened me." Sawyer set his rifle carefully against the wall, then turned back to her. Without warning, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Eliza gasped at the sudden contact, but then she melted into his embrace. She could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own, could feel the tremor in his strong arms. He had been terrified for her, she realized, as frightened as she had been. "I thought I was going to lose you," Sawyer said, his voice muffled against her hair. "When I came around that bend and saw that bear and you standing there frozen, I thought my heart would stop." "You saved me," Eliza said, her own arms wrapping around his broad back. "Again. You always save me." Sawyer pulled back slightly, enough to look down into her face. His storm-gray eyes were intense, filled with emotion he usually kept carefully hidden. "Eliza, I need to tell you something. I know I promised that I would not ask anything of you, that you would be safe here without expectations. But I cannot keep pretending anymore." "Pretending what?" Eliza asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "That I do not care for you," Sawyer said, his rough fingers coming up to gently cup her face. "That having you here has not changed everything for me. That I have not fallen completely in love with you." Eliza's breath caught. She searched his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that he had overstepped and ruined everything. "Harrison," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "I have fallen in love with you too." The relief that flooded his features was beautiful. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want. She lifted her face to meet his, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, two people who had been denying their feelings finally allowing the dam to break. But then the adrenaline and fear from the bear encounter mixed with weeks of suppressed attraction, and the kiss deepened. Sawyer's arms tightened around her, pulling her impossibly closer. Eliza's hands tangled in his long hair, and she pressed herself against the solid wall of his chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sawyer rested his forehead against hers. "I wanted to do that for so long," he admitted. "Every morning when you smiled at me over coffee, every evening when we talked by the fire, but I did not want you to feel obligated or trapped." "I never felt trapped," Eliza assured him. "I felt safe. I felt valued. And I felt myself falling for you a little more each day. The way you are with animals, so careful despite your strength. The way you explain things to me without making me feel foolish. The way you look at the mountains like they are the most beautiful thing in the world." "They were the most beautiful thing in my world," Sawyer said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Until you." They spent the rest of that day close together, making up for weeks of careful distance. They sat on the porch as the sun set, Eliza tucked against Sawyer's side, his arm around her shoulders. They talked about the future, about what it might look like for them together. "I do not have much to offer," Sawyer said honestly. "This cabin, the life I lead here, it is hard and isolated. Winter is especially difficult. We get snowed in for weeks at a time." "That does not frighten me," Eliza said. "Not anymore. What frightened me was being alone and vulnerable in Stockton, feeling like I had no future. Here with you, I feel like I have everything I need." "Are you sure?" Sawyer asked, needing to hear her certainty. "You are used to civilization, to having neighbors and shops and churches. Out here, it is just us and the wilderness." "I am sure," Eliza said firmly. She turned in his arms to face him directly. "Harrison, I spent 20 years in what you call civilization, and in all that time, I never felt as alive as I have these past weeks. I love the peace here. I love the simplicity. I love waking up to birdsong instead of drunken shouts. And I love you." Sawyer kissed her again, pouring all his feelings into the contact. When they separated, he said, "Then stay with me, not as my employee but as my partner, my wife if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Eliza asked, her heart soaring. "I am," Sawyer confirmed. "I do not have a ring, and I cannot offer you a fancy wedding or a honeymoon in San Francisco. But I can offer you my complete devotion, my protection, and every bit of love my heart can hold." "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They traveled back to Stockton 2 weeks later, riding down the mountain together with their horses side by side. The town looked exactly as Eliza remembered it, dusty and rough and chaotic. But now she viewed it through different eyes. This was not a place she needed anymore. She had found her home in the mountains with Harrison. They went first to see Mr. Patterson at the trading post. The old man greeted them with surprised delight, asking how Eliza had fared in the wilderness. When Sawyer announced their intention to marry, Mr. Patterson's weathered face split into a genuine smile. "I am happy for you both," he said warmly. "Sawyer, you are a lucky man, and Miss Eliza, you have found yourself a good one here." "I know," Eliza said, smiling up at her soon-to-be husband. They found the town's circuit preacher, a stern man named Reverend Thomas, who traveled between the mining camps and settlements performing marriages, baptisms, and funerals. He agreed to marry them the following morning, warning them that the ceremony would be simple and brief. "That is perfect," Sawyer said. "We do not need elaborate, we just need to be married." They spent that night at the boarding house in separate rooms, maintaining propriety for one last night. The next morning, they met at the small church building that also served as a schoolhouse and town meeting hall. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson served as witnesses. Reverend Thomas led them through their vows with efficient solemnity. "Do you, Harrison Sawyer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Sawyer said, his deep voice steady and sure. "And do you, Eliza Vance, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Eliza said, her voice clear and full of joy. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Sawyer did not need to be told twice. He pulled Eliza into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that the Pattersons and Reverend Thomas were watching. When they finally broke apart, Eliza was blushing and laughing, and Sawyer had the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face. They had a simple meal with the Pattersons, then spent the afternoon gathering a few supplies they would need for winter. Sawyer bought Eliza a proper winter coat, thick wool pants, and sturdy boots. "You will need these when the snow comes," he explained. He also bought her a small gold ring from the general store. It was not fancy, just a simple band, but when he slipped it onto her finger, Eliza felt her eyes fill with happy tears. "It is perfect," she said. They left Stockton the next morning as husband and wife, riding back up into the mountains that were now their shared home. The journey felt different this time. Everything felt different. Eliza was no longer a frightened woman fleeing danger. She was a wife riding beside her husband toward their future. When they reached the cabin, Sawyer dismounted and then lifted Eliza from her horse. Instead of setting her down, he carried her to the porch, making her laugh. "What are you doing?" she asked. carrying my bride over the threshold," Sawyer said. "It is tradition." He pushed open the door and carried her inside, setting her down gently in the middle of the cabin that was now truly their home. Then he kissed her again, and this kiss held a new promise, a new beginning. That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed that had been Eliza's alone but was now theirs together. Sawyer was gentle and patient, mindful that this was her first time. He took his time exploring her body, learning what made her gasp and sigh with pleasure. And Eliza, in turn, discovered the joy of touching him, of feeling his powerful muscles beneath her hands, of seeing his carefully controlled strength finally unleashed in passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the furs and blankets, skin against skin, hearts beating in harmony. Sawyer held her close, one large hand stroking her hair. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I have ever been," Eliza replied honestly. "When I left Missouri, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything, but I was wrong. I just had not found everything yet." "I know what you mean," Sawyer said. "I came to these mountains to escape, to be alone. I thought I wanted solitude, but I was just waiting for the right person to share this life with." The weeks that followed were blissful. They fell into an easy partnership, working together to prepare for the coming winter. Sawyer taught Eliza how to preserve meat, how to identify edible plants, how to read the weather by watching the sky and the animals. She proved to be an eager and capable student. In turn, Eliza brought her own skills to their life together. She was an excellent cook, transforming Sawyer's basic meals into something truly delicious. She sewed him new shirts and patched his old ones with care. She organized their supplies with an efficiency that impressed him. And she filled the cabin with small touches that made it warmer and more comfortable. Wildflowers in a tin cup on the table, curtains she made from spare fabric, a quilt she began stitching in the evenings. They also simply enjoyed being together. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their future. They took long walks through the forest, Eliza's hand tucked into Sawyer's as he showed her his favorite places. They made love with increasing passion and comfort as Eliza grew more confident in her own desires. But their peaceful existence faced its first real test in late September, when an unexpected snowstorm struck. Sawyer had been out checking his trap line when the storm rolled in with frightening speed. Eliza watched from the cabin window as the sky darkened and snow began falling in thick, heavy flakes. Within an hour, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Sawyer was still not back. Eliza tried not to panic. She stoked the fire high, hoping it would serve as a beacon if he was close enough to see the smoke. She put coffee on to boil, knowing he would be cold and wet when he returned. She tried to distract herself with tasks, but her eyes kept returning to the window, searching the white blur for any sign of her husband. Hours passed. The storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin and driving snow against the windows. Darkness fell early, and still Sawyer had not returned. Eliza paced the cabin floor, hands clasped together, trying to pray but finding the words would not come. What if he was lost? What if he was injured? What if he was freezing to death out there while she stood here safe and warm? She was considering the desperate idea of trying to go look for him when she heard it, a heavy thud on the porch. She ran to the door and yanked it open. Sawyer stumbled inside, covered in snow, his face red with cold. He was limping badly, and she could see he was favoring his left side. "Harrison!" She pulled him inside and slammed the door against the wind. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I am all right," Sawyer said through chattering teeth. "Just twisted my ankle in a hole I did not see because of the snow. It slowed me down getting back." Eliza helped him to a chair near the fire and began stripping off his wet outer clothes. His hands were like ice, and his whole body was shaking with cold. She grabbed blankets and wrapped them around him, then poured hot coffee and pressed the cup into his hands. "Drink this," she ordered. Slowly. While he drank, she knelt and carefully removed his boot from his injured ankle. It was swollen and already starting to bruise. Not broken, she thought with relief, but definitely sprained badly. "You could have died out there," she said, her voice trembling now that the immediate crisis was past. "If you had not made it back." "But I did," Sawyer said, reaching out to pull her close despite his exhaustion. "I would walk through 100 storms to get back to you." Eliza looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Do not ever scare me like that again." "I will try not to," he promised. "But Eliza, this is the life up here. Storms come suddenly. Animals can be dangerous. There are 100 ways things can go wrong. If you are going to survive in the mountains, you need to be prepared for that." "Then teach me," Eliza said firmly. "Teach me everything I need to know so that next time I can help instead of just sitting here worrying." Over the next few weeks, as Sawyer's ankle healed, he did exactly that. He taught her how to use his rifle, spending hours with her in the meadow practicing until she could consistently hit a target. He showed her landmarks and how to navigate using the sun and stars. He taught her which plants could be used for medicine and how to build an emergency shelter if she ever got caught far from the cabin in bad weather. Eliza absorbed it all, determined never to be helpless again. And as she learned, Sawyer found himself falling even more deeply in love with his capable, determined wife. She was tougher than he had given her credit for, with a core of strength that showed itself in crisis. By the time winter truly set in, they were as prepared as they could be. The cabin was stocked with food, firewood was stacked high under the porch overhang, and they had each other. The first major snowfall came in early November, blanketing their meadow in white and transforming the landscape into something magical. Eliza discovered that she loved winter in the mountains. Yes, it was cold and isolating, but there was a beauty to it that took her breath away. Mornings when she opened the door to see fresh snow sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. Evenings when she and Sawyer sat by the fire, so close they might as well have been one person. Nights when the world outside was frozen and silent, and they created warmth together under layers of blankets. They were snowed in for days at a time, but it did not bother her. She and Sawyer had plenty to talk about, plenty of ways to keep each other entertained. And the enforced closeness only deepened their bond. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the little quirks that made them individuals and the deep values that made them partners. On Christmas Eve, Sawyer surprised her with a gift. He had been working on it secretly in the evenings while she was busy with other tasks. It was a wooden box, beautifully carved with images of the mountains and trees and a bear. "To keep your treasures safe," he said, handing it to her. Eliza opened the box and found inside a dried wildflower from their meadow, carefully preserved. "You kept this from our first week here together," Sawyer said. "Before I even knew if you would stay. I picked it because it reminded me of you, beautiful and delicate but stronger than it looks." Eliza set the box carefully aside and threw her arms around him. "I love it. I love you." "I love you too," Sawyer said. "More than I thought possible to love anyone." They made love that night with particular tenderness, holding each other as the snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. And afterward, as Eliza drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the path that had led her here. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing the green meadow beneath. Wildflowers burst into bloom. The stream, which had been mostly frozen all winter, roared back to life, and Eliza realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Sawyer. But as her monthly courses failed to appear for the third time and she began feeling nauseous in the mornings, there was no denying it. She was carrying their child. She told him one evening after dinner, simply and directly, "Harrison, I am with child." Sawyer froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully as if worried he might drop it. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor," Eliza said. "I believe the baby will come in late autumn." A slow smile spread across Sawyer's face, transforming his features. He stood and crossed to her, pulling her up and into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle. "A baby," he said in wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Eliza asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Sawyer said. He set her down gently and placed one large hand on her still flat stomach. "A son or daughter, our child. Eliza, you have given me everything." "We have given each other everything," she corrected. The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued her through the spring and into early summer. But Sawyer was endlessly patient and supportive, holding her hair when she was sick, preparing bland foods that would not upset her stomach, and taking over more of the physical chores around the cabin. As her belly grew, Sawyer became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy or climbing or doing anything he deemed risky. Eliza found it both touching and occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not helpless," she reminded him one day after he insisted on carrying water from the stream for her. "I know," Sawyer said. "But humor me. I have never done this before, and I cannot stand the thought of anything happening to you or the baby." How could she argue with that? So she let him coddle her, accepting his protectiveness as the expression of love that it was. They made a trip to Stockton in late June. Eliza wanted to see a doctor and make sure the pregnancy was progressing normally. The town seemed even rougher and noisier than she remembered. After months in the peaceful mountains, the chaos of civilization felt overwhelming. The doctor, a harried man named Dr. Wells, who served the mining camps and settlements, examined her and declared everything looked fine. "The baby seems healthy, and so do you, Mrs. Sawyer. Just take it easy as you get closer to your time. No heavy lifting or strenuous activity." They stocked up on supplies they would need for the birth. Clean cloth, thread for stitching if there were tears, and various herbs and tonics the doctor recommended. Then they hurried back to their mountain home, both eager to leave Stockton behind. Summer was glorious that year. Eliza's belly grew round and full. She felt the baby move for the first time in early July, tiny flutters that made her gasp with wonder. She grabbed Sawyer's hand and pressed it to her stomach so he could feel too. "That is our child," she said, tears of joy in her eyes. Sawyer's expression was one of awe. Amazing, absolutely amazing. As autumn approached and Eliza's time drew near, Sawyer began to get nervous. What if something went wrong? What if the baby came early? What if there were complications? They were 2 days from the nearest town and any kind of medical help, but Eliza remained calm. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years," she reminded him. "My body knows what to do." Her labor began on a crisp October morning. Eliza woke with a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified into contractions. Sawyer, who had been sleeping in light and alert, was up immediately. "Is it time?" he asked. "I believe so," Eliza said, breathing through a contraction. Sawyer had prepared as much as he could. He had clean water boiled and ready, cloths laid out, the bed made fresh. But nothing could have prepared him for watching his wife in labor. It was the most terrifying and amazing thing he had ever witnessed. Eliza labored through the day and into the evening. Sawyer stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. When she squeezed his hand so hard during contractions that he thought his bones might break, he did not complain. Finally, as the sun was setting and the cabin was bathed in golden light, their son was born. Sawyer caught the baby in his large hands, staring in wonder at the tiny, perfect human they had created. The baby took his first breath and let out a loud, healthy cry. "A boy," Sawyer said, his voice thick with emotion. "Eliza, we have a son." Eliza, exhausted but glowing with joy, held out her arms. Sawyer placed the baby on her chest, and she looked down at her son with absolute love. They named him Daniel after Eliza's father, Daniel Sawyer. He had a shock of dark hair like his father and his mother's delicate features. He was perfect. The weeks after Daniel's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but they were also filled with indescribable joy. Sawyer proved to be a devoted father, completely smitten with his son. When Daniel cried in the night, Sawyer was up immediately, changing him or walking with him so Eliza could rest. When Daniel needed to nurse, Sawyer would bring him to Eliza and then sit nearby, watching his family with contentment. "You are a natural father," Eliza told him one evening as he rocked Daniel to sleep. "I did not know I wanted children until I had one," Sawyer admitted. "But now I cannot imagine life without him, without both of you." Winter came again, but this time they had Daniel. The cabin felt even warmer and more like a home with the addition of their son. Eliza marveled at how much her life had changed in just over a year. She had gone from a frightened, lost woman with no prospects to a wife and mother living a life she loved. As Daniel grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby, Eliza and Sawyer settled into their roles as parents. They took turns getting up with him at night, shared the responsibilities of care, and marveled together over every milestone. His first smile, his first laugh, the first time he rolled over. Spring brought new challenges as Daniel became more mobile. He learned to crawl, and suddenly no corner of the cabin was safe. Sawyer built a barrier around the fireplace and moved anything dangerous out of reach. They took turns watching him, and when the weather was nice, they would spread a blanket in the meadow and let him explore the grass and flowers under their careful supervision. One afternoon in late spring, as Daniel napped and Eliza prepared dinner, Sawyer came in from checking his trap line with an unusual expression on his face. "What is wrong?" Eliza asked immediately. "Nothing is wrong," Sawyer assured her. "But I saw something today that made me think. There is a valley about 3 hours' ride from here. It has good land, water, lots of game. I have been thinking we might want to expand, build a bigger house, maybe even run some cattle eventually." "You want to move?" Eliza asked, surprised. "Not far," Sawyer said quickly. "Just to a place with more room. This cabin has been perfect for us, but Daniel is growing and I hope we will have more children. We are going to need more space." Eliza considered this. The cabin was starting to feel cramped with the three of them. "Show me this valley." The next day, leaving Daniel with friendly neighbors they had met that winter, a family who had built a homestead about 10 miles away, Sawyer and Eliza rode out to see the valley he had mentioned. It was beautiful, with rolling meadows and stands of pine trees. A wide stream ran through it, and in the distance they could see mountain peaks. "We could build a house right there," Sawyer said, pointing to a level area near the stream. "Big enough for a family, maybe add a barn, some corrals, make a real ranch out of it." "It is beautiful," Eliza agreed. "But Harrison, that is a lot of work, building a house, starting a ranch." "I know," Sawyer said, But I want to build something permanent, something we can pass down to Daniel and any other children we have. This cabin was fine for a man alone. But I am not alone anymore, and I want to give my family more. Eliza understood. She had seen how much becoming a husband and father had changed Sawyer. The solitary mountain man who had been content with a simple cabin now wanted to build an empire for his family. "Then let us do it," she said. "Let us build our future here." They spent the rest of the spring and summer working on their new home. It was back-breaking labor. Sawyer cut and hauled logs while Eliza helped where she could, limited by having to care for Daniel. But slowly, the house took shape. It was much larger than the cabin, with 2 bedrooms, a large main room with a proper kitchen, and a loft that could be divided into more rooms later. They moved into the new house in early autumn, right before Daniel's first birthday. It still needed work, but it was livable and felt like a palace after the small cabin. Eliza set about making it a home, unpacking their belongings and arranging furniture Sawyer had built. On Daniel's first birthday, they had a small celebration, just the 3 of them. Eliza made a special cake using precious sugar they had bought in Stockton. Daniel, who was just learning to walk, took a few wobbly steps toward his father, and Sawyer caught him with a laugh. "Look at him go," Sawyer said proudly. "He will be running before we know it." That night, after Daniel was asleep in his own room, Sawyer and Eliza sat on the porch of their new house, looking out at the valley that was now their home. "Happy?" Sawyer asked, pulling Eliza close. "Beyond measure," she replied. "When I think about where I was 2 years ago, scared and alone in Stockton, and where I am now, it seems like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Sawyer said. Over the next few years, their family and their ranch grew. Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah when Daniel was 3. 2 years later came another son, James. Sawyer built onto the house, adding more rooms to accommodate their growing family. He brought in cattle and horses, building the ranch into a successful operation with the help of a few hired hands he brought on during busy seasons. But no matter how busy life got, Sawyer and Eliza always made time for each other. They still took walks together in the evenings after the children were asleep. They still talked for hours by the fire, and they still loved each other with the same intensity as those early days in the cabin. Daniel grew into a strong, capable boy who worshipped his father and learned everything Sawyer could teach him about ranching and the wilderness. Sarah was quiet and thoughtful, with her mother's kind heart. James was a bundle of energy who kept everyone on their toes. The years passed quickly, filled with hard work and laughter and love. They faced challenges: harsh winters, sick cattle, a forest fire that came dangerously close to their property. But they faced everything together, their love and partnership seeing them through. When Daniel turned 18, he took on more responsibility on the ranch, becoming his father's right hand. Sarah, at 15, was already turning heads in Stockton when they went for supplies, though Sawyer frightened off any potential suitors with his protective glare. James, at 13, was still figuring out who he wanted to be. One evening, as Sawyer and Eliza sat on their porch watching the sunset, now in their mid-40s but still deeply in love, Eliza reflected on their life together. "You ever think about that day in the trading post?" she asked. "When you broke that bottle and walked me away from that awful trapper?" "Sometimes," Sawyer admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had not gone in at that exact moment, or if I had ignored the situation, or if you had been too frightened to trust me and come to the mountains." "I was frightened," Eliza said. "Terrified, actually, but something told me you were different, that you were someone I could trust." "And were you right?" Sawyer asked, though he knew the answer. "I was right about everything," Eliza said, taking his hand. You gave me safety when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. You gave me all those things too, Sawyer said. I was existing before you, not living. You taught me how to love again, how to open my heart despite all the walls I had built. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, they could hear their children talking and laughing, the sounds of family life that had once seemed impossible. "We did good," Sawyer said finally. "We did," Eliza agreed. "We did very good." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Sawyer and Eliza remained on the porch, holding hands just as they had in those early days in the small cabin. They had built a life together from nothing, carved out of wilderness and adversity and transformed by love. They had children who were healthy and happy. They had a successful ranch. They had each other. It was more than enough. It was everything. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. Daniel married a woman from Stockton, a teacher named Mary, and they built a house on the far side of the valley. They gave Sawyer and Eliza their first grandchildren, twin boys who had their grandfather's size and their grandmother's kindness. Sarah eventually married as well, though not until she was 22, and had made her parents wait through years of courtship with a gentle rancher from a neighboring property. Her wedding was held in the valley, with half the county in attendance, and Sawyer cried when he walked her down the makeshift aisle, something no one but Eliza had ever seen him do. James took the longest to settle down. He was restless and adventurous, spending several years working on cattle drives and exploring the territories. But eventually, he returned home, bringing with him a wife he had met in Colorado and a renewed appreciation for the life his parents had built. As Sawyer and Eliza entered their 60s, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to their children and grandchildren. The valley that had once been empty wilderness was now home to their extended family, with houses dotted across the landscape, all connected by blood and love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration. The entire family gathered at the original house, which had been expanded and improved but still held the bones of what Sawyer had built all those years ago. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed, Sawyer pulled Eliza aside. They walked to the edge of the property, to a spot that overlooked the entire valley. In the moonlight, they could see the houses of their children, the barns and corrals, the cattle grazing peacefully. "Do you remember what I said to you the day we moved here?" Sawyer asked. "That I wanted to build something permanent, something we could pass down." "I remember," Eliza said. "I think we did it," Sawyer said, gesturing at the valley spread below them. "This is our legacy. Not just the land and the buildings, but the family, the love. It is more than I ever dreamed possible," Eliza said. "All because you broke a bottle of whiskey and took a chance on a frightened woman in a trading post." "No," Sawyer corrected gently. "All because you were brave enough to trust me, brave enough to love me. Everything good in my life comes from you." Eliza leaned against her husband's still strong shoulder. They had weathered decades together, had faced every challenge side by side. They had built not just a ranch but a dynasty, not just a house but a home filled with generations of love. "I love you, Harrison Sawyer," Eliza said. "Just as much now as that first day you told me how you felt." "And I love you, Eliza Sawyer," he replied. "More than words can express. More than 100 lifetimes could show. You are everything to me. You always have been. You always will be." They stood together in the moonlight, Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded every expectation. Around them, their family slept peacefully, safe and loved. Above them, stars wheeled across the vast sky. And between them flowed the same love that had started in a trading post in Stockton, California, on a day when a mountain man decided to protect a woman who needed help. It was a love that had endured and grown, that had created generations and would continue long after they were gone. It was the kind of love that people wrote stories about, the kind that seemed too perfect to be real, but it was real. As real as the mountains that surrounded their valley, as permanent as the stone foundations of the houses their children lived in, as true as the promises they had made to each other 30 years ago. Sawyer and Eliza Sawyer had built their happily ever after, and it was magnificent.